First of all, welcome to day 3 at the big week, the World Economic Forum week. It's a big energy day, and we are the virtual Woodhouse. Many of you actually went to the Woodhouse at COP26, and Wood as a company are really supporting the clean energy. So we're part of the World To-Do list. And for 1 hour, 2 hours ago, there was a great conversations at the World Economic Forum around navigating the energy transition. If you haven't watched it yet, I would definitely recommend you to do it. We had the Minister of Energy from Saudi Arabia speaking about blue, green, and pink hydrogen. We had Bjørn Rosgreen, the president and CEO of ABB, speaking about the crucial thing about the digitalization of the energy sector. We had just great speakers, so take a look at that when your time permit. And later today, there will be an additional energy session where both John Kerry and Bill Gates will be speaking. What I'm excited about with this session here is that we are going to talk about the future of carbon, which I know is close to all the missions that each of you are on, especially Uday Kemken, a good friend of me from Sun Group. And we are going to speak about what if we could capitalize on carbon? What if we could actually use carbon as a resource? I took the opportunity to a previous session today, which was more traditional session about carbon capture, to say, yes, we capture it, but what if we actually use it for something? What could be the incentive for that? I will say the original World Economic Forum agenda before we went virtually, carbon was a big topic, is a big topic. It is being addressed at the World Economic Forum. It will be a big topic going forward, and I know that Uday will also be speaking about this. So with this, I will kick off the conversation, and what we'll do first is that I will kindly ask each of you just to introduce yourself. So I have Anders Lier for Energy AI, I have Uday Kemken from the Sun Group, Katie from EY, Josh from Woods, and Rob Wood from co-founder chairman of IP3 International Alliance Nuclear Partners. But you can introduce yourself much better than I can do, and let's do that first. So if I get you going, Anders, first, and then we just take this sequence here, and then we start with the questions.
Thank you very much, Anne. I'm really happy to be here on this amazing panel. So my name is Anders. I'm a Norwegian guy, but I'm an international impact investor. I've been kind of driving this field of innovation and technology out of the Nordics. Kind of a corporate dropout, being in the venture space, investing in companies that do solve the grand challenges with exponential technologies. And I strongly believe that the best way to make the world a better place is through business and dedicate to solve the big problems and provide value to humans and the planet.
Thank you, Anders. Over to you, Uday.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here today and so grateful to you, Anne, for having convened this specialized discussion, which is really important, I think, right now. As far as myself, I am vice chair of an Indian family-owned business group called the Sun Group. I'm also a managing trustee of a family foundation. What makes that foundation a little unusual is that it's the longest standing Indian foundation focusing on climate change mitigation. I was in Rio back in '92, and this will be my 30th year focusing on climate change policy and decarbonization. And so the sense of urgency only gets greater. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Uday. Katie?
No, I'm really happy to be here too. I'm so excited to be speaking about this topic. I run global sustainability tax for EY, and we started this really back in 2015 when I rejoined the firm after coming from working on these issues in the US Senate as a staffer to the majority leader. And when we started in 2015, it was about carbon pricing being a revenue kind of issue as opposed to being an environmental issue. So after working on this for all these years, now we see, it's carbon pricing, addressing carbon is is much more of an environmental issue than a revenue issue, even though it's a significant revenue issue. And I have to say that I've come to the conclusion after watching mostly, the US system, but also other systems around the world, that business is key to moving this policy. I think business is key to moving us to where we need to be in terms of climate goals. And, we can help set up policies that nudge business towards that kind of position. And, I'm just really pleased to be here to kind of make progress on ideas in this regard. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie. And Robert, I think is the right, if you would introduce yourself. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Anne. Delighted and honored, flattered actually, to join the team here this morning. I was moved to reorient, being a national security buff, 5 years ago, out of concern that some states were exploiting their ability with state-owned industries to offer attractive proposals to emerging markets throughout the world to build infrastructure of various kinds, but including power generation, and with very, very attractive terms to become engaged in providing whatever it may be, from power generation to ports to pipelines to various kinds of systems. And however, the financing was so appealing, irresistible actually, that they became engaged, and over time, those terms led to circumstances where the host country was unable to fulfill the terms, and over time, as they were turned into equity, compromise their own sovereignty. Well, we're not here to discuss that today, but I mention it because I think in everything we propose and criticize today, we must think about what are the driving forces that shape our conversation. Specifically, I think two dominate, and one of them is the enormous growth in population that is predictable in the next 30 years. That is from roughly 7 billion people to 10 billion people. And a very heavy majority of that growth will occur in Africa. Separately but related, a dominant part of that growth will be, virtually all of that growth, will be urbanized, and people, 3 billion, moving into cities will pose an enormous challenge to provide all of the wherewithal to sustain life and growth. There's the framework of our challenge, and we have been focused upon that for about 5 years. Clearly, for countries that have various levels of resource, coal, oil, gas, others, they will seek to adapt those resources to solutions for their particular population. If people, however, have only coal, they're going to use coal. So our job is to see how we can assist them by not only financing, but on terms and on usage that minimize the carbonization and indeed propose for them how to moderate, perhaps eliminate coal as the primary source, and indeed through alternatives to help them reach their goals nonetheless. Alternatives including renewables for sure, but as well to consider nuclear and whether or not nuclear can be financed, delivered, and after 5 years' time, we're confident that it can. This will take considerable focus by host governments as well as by export credit agencies and international lenders. And I'm prepared to talk about that today and would welcome criticism and comment from my colleagues here this morning. We have been active in Africa as well as Eastern Europe and so forth. So I won't prolong this further, Anne.
Sounds
but
good.
look forward to talking about how nuclear is an important contributing factor here.
Thank you so much, Robert. And then Josh, if you can introduce yourself.
Yes, hello everyone. Also, likewise, excited to join the discussion. So Josh Carmichael, the Vice President of Hydrogen for the Wood Group, global, and we see from our clients that we advise in a number of areas for hydrogen, for decarbonisation, the discussion around carbon, and from a technology point of view, what's possible and not possible, but also from an economic point of view, of course. And it's always exciting. I've worked for government before, I've worked for public transport, I've worked for automotive in both energy and transport using batteries and hydrogen. It's interesting to see the different players, how they view things, either positive or negative against it. And I think carbon also attracts that kind of discussion as well, which I'm sure we're going to have today. So looking forward to it.
Thank you so much. So, so let us get going here. And Uday, I would love you first to start, to provide us all with your vision on the future of carbon. Oh,
yeah. Thank you very much. And, I mentioned earlier that I've been focusing on the climate theme for 30 years now. And, we have seen great progress over these 30 years. Those of you who were in COP26 in Glasgow felt a sense of excitement, a sense of the business world being there. It felt almost like today's World Economic Forum meeting. It felt like Davos. It felt like the heads of industry, the heads of technology, the heads of finance were there together with government and the NGO sector. And there was a real sense of private sector momentum. I personally believe that decarbonization journey that we started 30 years ago will now pick up momentum. And we will get to a world by 2040, 2050, wherein most production systems on the planet will be substantially more efficient from an energy standpoint and more decarbonized than they are today. And this will be almost unrecognizable to today. It's like, when we think about 25, 30 years ago and people were smoking in restaurants and nightclubs, and today it's unacceptable. The same thing will be true, I think, looking back on our industrial civilization of today. Here's the problem, however, which is that, we are at about 415 parts per million ppm today in the atmosphere. And I was talking to a very good friend of mine who's a scientist and who I've worked with for 20 years, who said that, look, before Copenhagen, we were trying to limit carbon in the atmosphere to 380 ppm by the mid-century. And he said the reason we in the scientific community were desperately trying to do that was because we were afraid the natural tipping points on the planet would be triggered above 400. And I said, well, we're at 415 now, aren't we? And he said, well, yes, but that's only carbon, that's not GHG. And he said, unfortunately, the truth is, however optimistic and excited we feel after COP26, the truth is that timing is not on our side. Nature doesn't care about our human processes. And so what we found is that in the last 12 months, I think 2021 will be remembered as a year business moved, but it'll also be a year when climate change was no longer in the future. And he explained, and if we have time, I can talk about it, some of these tremendous shifts and destabilizations, for example, in the jet stream that have led to the freezing of Texas, the burning of northern Canada, and many, many other effects, the methane release in the Siberian tundra. So therefore, here's my challenge for us to think about. Let's imagine that by the end of the decade, despite our best efforts, ppm is hundreds more than it is today. So we're in the 600s, 700s, 800s. The natural tipping points have been triggered. The fires alone have put up carbon into the atmosphere. I think it was 5 million tons in the last 12 months just from fires. It's just unbelievable. So with this acceleration, we know that reducing carbon emission will not be enough. And even in the IEA work or in the work of the Energy Commission, any of these predictions, negative carbon becomes important. And therefore, of course, there's a slew of direct air capture technologies that are kicking in and starting to think about how we can suck out the carbon from this highly carbonized atmosphere of 2030. The question is, if carbon is still a liability, if it's still a cost, and let's forget about these small cases of petroleum extraction that make CCS economically viable in rare cases, then if it's CCS, then we're in a world of cost. Capitalism doesn't tend to want to take on board cost. It wants to take on board profit. And for that, carbon has to have a value. Now, we may have a political price on carbon that creates that value, but there's no confidence today in the track record of these last 30 years that we are going to have a very strong global price on carbon. I have tremendous faith in the greed of capitalism. So the question then is, can carbon have an asset value? We know that carbon has some asset value. It's used in carbon fiber. It's used in many different applications, even today, graphite for pencils, many other things, carbon black for the tire industry and so forth. Could we imagine a world in which we bring together the greatest companies, the greatest technologists, the universities, policymakers, financiers, working in a Davos-like environment, maybe Davos, to think about that new world where we use carbon to make everything around us. And that creates a price on carbon, which sucks out that carbon for the rest of the century from 2030 to 2100 and slowly starts to repair our civilization. That's the thesis, Anne, that you were kind enough to listen to the other day. And thank you so much for indulging that imaginary world.
So Anas, I know with Energy AI that you are right now working on carbon unity and are building like more like a movement. We're coming together. Can you speak about this? Because as Uda is talking about, we need all the best mind in the world to come up with ideas about how we can use carbon in a positive way.
Yeah, first I just would say that it's super inspiring, Uday. I mean, net zero is not enough. The humankind has never done more than we do today, but at the same time, climate change is an exponential problem. The worse it gets, the faster it gets. And even though we are doing a lot, the gap between our actions and our needs is continuing to grow. So we need higher ambitions. And of course, when it comes to capital and the greed of capital, we are all inspired by Larry Fink's new letter and Paul Polman's annual letter. So the question is, will you lead or will you be led? And I think in that perspective, I think that it has to be a decentralized and a democratized approach to it. We cannot kind of have centralized approaches like the Web 2.0 mentality. We need to kind of acknowledge the fact that also sustainability is a data problem and you cannot innovate in isolation. So our approach is, of course, the startup approach, build an exponential organization. We don't have tons of resources in the startup world, but we need to kind of build and benefit the resources. That's why I really appreciate the dialogue with Uday, because he's kind of also one of the global leaders pushing the new innovators of the world to be a part of the solution. And I think that we need to build climate conscious, decentralized, autonomous organization that includes everyone to participate in the climate battle. And that's what Energy.ai is about, and then creating efficient tools to measure reduce, replace, and remove carbon emissions. So, and I think that if we could create a hassle-free and a zero-cost carbon footprint solution to get you started, I think that's a very important starting point. And the greenhouse gas protocol with direct emissions, scope 1 and scope 2, hardly anyone is there. So we need to get there, and then we could start digging into scope 3 and creating a one-stop shop to reduce and offset your footprint. That's carbon unity.
Thank you so much, Anna. So Josh, you lead Wood's Hydrogen, and you are part of a white paper that actually came out today with Reuters, which was an output after COP26. And your daily life, your whole career, is about hydrogen. Do you see in those conversations that you have with clients that one thing is about capturing carbon, and as I mentioned, we talk about the blue, the green, and the pink hydrogen, but are we also mature enough to what Uda is talking about, that making some positive things out of carbon? So how do you see that, Josh?
Yeah, super interesting. So I think if you look at it from an engineering point of view, of course, you take a technical look on it and you look at the technologies available. I know that there's air capture units being deployed in Switzerland where you take carbon out of the air. But if you look at it from a political point of view, a lot of people are focusing on, well, let's not make the carbon to begin with, right? So this is the discussion also with, you look at the pandemic with COVID, when we had a lot of people staying at home, should you pay the companies for people to stay home or pay the people directly? It's the in or out effect. And I think the discussion around carbon is, should we make it to begin with, or should, once it's made, should we capture it? Discussion aside from that. And before we get to that, also a technology discussion, is there a way that we can capture and use carbon to make different products out of? That company in Switzerland is making blocks out of the carbon that it captures from the air. So I think I learned in my early years in masters, I had a very good professor. He always said that, CEOs will always get excited about sustainability and CSR because they have to report it, and they'll put it into their annual reports. The moment you get the CFO excited and the CTO, the moment that it's worth more to a company to do it, then they will do it. And there was a famous article this morning in the Australian Financial Review, where one of the big corporate people came out and said, whether you value carbon or not, I'm going to, and I'm going to go after it, and I'm going to make value from it in my own way, either by producing it and using it, or trading it on a stock, the carbon price, of course, that we're all familiar with. And I will be there first. So, either you lead or you will be led. That's literally the words, similar to what Uday said. And I think, people, civilizations, we're pretty predictable. The moment we have technology and ideas, that's not the issue. We need a big bang to happen. The same happened with electric vehicles. We had them in 1990, early 1900s, until Dieselgate happened. We had the Prius, we had Panasonic making batteries. Dieselgate happened. We switched, and all of a sudden we got strong policies and measures in place to switch to electric vehicles. I'm waiting for the moment for carbon to come, where we suddenly wake up and realize, despite the documentaries and all the things that are happening, I'm not hopeful that event will come. In the meantime, we need people to say, well, it's not going to come. I'm going to go out and get it anyway. And so then you bring in the politics, the economics, and the technology to say, well, there's a thing here to say it will be made and I will make money from it. And we can make certain products or different solutions from this, aside from what will happen in the politics and the policies that will be developed. So it's an interesting time, and it depends where you sit in the value chain and where you see this as a threat or as an opportunity. And if you're ready for it as a management, if you have your strategies in place, and if you're not, I think the one clear that was the thing was clear from COP26. If you're not ready for it, you better be. And if you're not, the shareholders will come after you anyway, because your consumers, IKEA, Amazon, they are asking their supply chain, the scope 3 emissions to be carbon neutral. Those companies responding, you have to be ready for it, and you better get out in front of it and see how you can benefit from what's coming anyway. So I think that's probably the advice that came through strongly at COP, and certainly the discussions we have with our clients around blue, green, pink, whatever it might be. It's going to come. The question is, what are you going to do about it? And basically how we can help in that transition.
Thank you so much, Josh. Katie, Ernst & Young, you're the same as Josh, out there with clients, and you are leading this effort at Ernst & Young. And I know you have a very specific view in looking at it. So how do you see, what is your vision for the future of carbon?
the vision, my vision really, and it matches everyone else's view, is that we need to price it. So I come from a tax background, and but tax or no tax, we need to price carbon, I think. And I should say that these are my own views, not necessarily the views of my employer. But the truth is that it is a capitalist society. People do respond to price signals. And the way to shrink the green premium is to price carbon. And I think, you do see corporations responding before a price is set, before an explicit carbon tax or ETS even. And I think a lot of those responses to stakeholders, to employees, to shareholders, they are based on, in some ways, kind of there's a movement about reporting sustainability activities, ESG reporting. That is almost kind of a first step towards pricing. It's a little bit of a shadow price, because if you have a bad report, it's a nick, it's a cost. But I do think, okay, so that's stage one. But we really need to start recognizing the social cost. Everyone knows it's there. Everyone knows there's a cost of inaction. And everyone knows that cost of inaction is very inequitably distributed. And I think, that's maybe why we don't price it, but it's extra motivation why governments should price it. And I'd say that, that will help make all these technologies and all this research. It will, it should increase the return relative to business as normal or business as usual. The other thing I think about all of this is, as we talk about this and we talk about green and pink or, blue hydrogen and all these technologies that really are out there and ready to be pushed, I think we need to look at the oceans and the forests, right? They are there are ballast here. They are the things that are sucking up the carbon right now, this natural kind of carbon sequestration. And right now, and I was lucky enough to go to the COP with the Coalition of Rainforest Nations, and it was very interesting because they have an asset that sucks carbon out of the air that we greatly depend on. And deforestation is responsible for a lot of, for net increase in emissions. And I think we have to, when we think about all this pricing and we think about the future of carbon, so the CFRN, it's make a tree worth more alive than dead. And we are asking these communities, stop cutting down trees, stop doing this, but then we're not really providing them any economic alternatives. And I do think that if we can someday, and I hope this is my vision, I guess, if we could someday look at these natural sinks as invaluable assets and price them accordingly. Oil used to be, oil led to the economic development of great regions, right, around this world. Will forests, do they have that potential? How are we going to value kind of what we have now? And how are we going to shrink green premium for what we need in the future? And I think there's a need for policies here. And, I, for one, would love to help make them, I guess. And we should all be helping to work with business communities and governments to design efficient approaches here. That's what I think.
So Uday, when we spoke about this at COP26, and I know you're on a mission, and I know that is shared also with Anas and the other panelists on this call here, is really to start the conversation. A lot of great new ideas need to be brought together to come up with what we can use carbon for. So how do we take it from here? What do we do? Because it is like a movement, and I know that with Energy AI, there's a platform, there's a movement. Just talked about, there's no way around it. So how do we get everybody on board, so we don't just talk about capturing carbon, but we actually talk about doing something with it?
So I think the starting point is there are a number of existing organizations. Obviously, Anders is leading a great movement, which is really exciting, and that will have a democratic, to use Kathy's work, ballast to what we're doing. There is the UK Centre for Carbon Dioxide Utilisation. There is CO2 Chem. There's the CCUS Projects Network. So by talking and deepening our conversation and engagement with these networks, that will help us identify the key players, number one. Number two, I believe that it is in the interests of hydrocarbon economies really to understand better how we could push utilization of carbon as with major hydrocarbon companies, because that could decarbonize their core revenue streams. And therefore, I think what we need to do is get some of these people to sponsor financially and organizationally the convening of leaders in this field, coming together. So what do I mean by leaders in this field? Could involve some of the people I've just mentioned, both from the distributed innovative network that Anders was talking about, as well as from hydrocarbon companies and states. But in addition, you could imagine a vision of getting Stanford and MIT, Caltech, Cambridge, Oxford, and lots of other engineering departments who are really at the forward edge of what we can do with carbon, together with companies, the major companies in the field of creating the products that we imagine are in the ballpark of these innovative themes, and getting them together on an annual basis and developing interconvening tracks. One of the problems is very often people convene on panels and then they don't follow the track of the action steps required to actually develop whatever it is. And if we give ourselves 9 years to do that every single year to 2030, and whether the World Economic Forum considers it appropriate to host that track, or whether it's done with their affiliation somewhere else in the world, whatever is the appropriate way to do it. But if we started off, imagine a very high level, but that doesn't mean non-democratic meeting that starts to get organized in product tracks and starts to look at innovation tracks. We start to do it in 2022. Then by 2030, I could imagine the maturing of those business models to the point where they can actually provide revenue streams to direct air capture or flue gas capture or chemical capture technologies that link into sources of carbon, not only to decarbonize in the way Robert was talking about, for example, coal, which is obviously the elephant in the room and is critical, Robert, what you said, but also assuming that we are only partially successful between now and the end of the decade, and we've blown right past all our targets, and we can suck it all out again, but in a profitable way. And so that I would be proposing for your consideration, the consideration of anyone listening to this discussion, the creation of such a forum, such a meeting, and the commitment over a decade to keeping those people meeting regularly and in a very serious and professional way around the innovation and scale up of those industries. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Uday. So Robert, how do you see the proposal here, and based on your experience, that we really begin to get the conversation going around what we can do with the carbon going forward?
I think that it has to involve access to capital and the ability to conceive an on-ramp, that is, a ramp that takes us from carbon to some alternative that is financeable and ultimately profitable for investors. We've been focused on this for around 5 years now and are convinced by private capital leaders that indeed there are several designs that make sense to them. For example, in some countries, they have the blessing of existing nuclear. Take the Emirates. And they are in a position now to generate the electricity that is needed to make hydrogen, and really could well become the hub globally for the launch of hybrid systems, that is, systems that are built around hydrogen for all of its well-known applications, from transportations to a host of industrial applications. Well, what about Europe? Well, Europe has instituted the carbon tax, as you know, roughly 70 euros per ton of carbon. It makes sense. It is certainly an incentive for current producers of carbon, people who are running chemical factories that are huge emission of carbon, and they can see a financial incentive for getting off this. Well, what do you propose to them? Well, it can be a combination of alternative generators, renewables for sure. But the point is to get to a clean solution. It is clear that there are alternatives. I mentioned renewables. In addition, renewables such as nuclear power. We are looking for companies that demonstrate the ability to bring forth this on-ramp that takes us from carbon generation of electricity to a clean alternative like nuclear at an affordable basis. And we are very confident that that is feasible. Our confidence is born of the emergence of small modular reactors of nuclear power that are not yet online. However, within 3 to 5 years, we are confident, or hear the confidence of manufacturers, that they will be available. And so when we look at available renewables, these are, as you know, systems that don't provide baseload power, but that are an adjunct and contributor to providing electricity. And until nuclear gets here, they, along with alternative, albeit carbon systems, oil, gas, coal, will have to have a role to play. This is especially true in emerging markets throughout Africa that we're finding still find appealing the ability to join with us in creating the on-ramp that really is feasible. The ability primarily to bring private capital to bear because they see at the end of this on-ramp no more carbon use, but an on-ramp that involves renewables and ultimately small modular reactors that provide a far more suitable future of industrializations in these African countries. We're talking now about SMRs that can provide not only baseload power, but process heat and power for desalination, as well as industrial applications that make for really a quite clean, but also versatile power system in the future. This can be done. I say it can be done only because we're getting quite clear resonance from private capital that has been on the sidelines for many years, not seeing really what are the plausible scenarios that lead to the technology first, and then the production and the versatile systems coming forward. But we're confident it can be done because there's a self-interest in countries, for example, in Europe that are producing chemicals and a huge amount of carbon. They must get off coal, no question about it.
Yes.
So,
and to your point, Robert, that was also discussed at COP26. We are coming to an end of the session, and the importance of this session here was really to start the conversation about what is the future of carbon, to kickstart that. That was like a commitment we did at COP26. Even though we wanted to have done it in person at World Economic Forum, we did it now virtually instead. So we will now start this movement. I would call it a movement. It's a mindset. And then for all the audience out there listening in, I would like to let you know that soon the next session is starting at World Economic Forum, which is about accelerating and scaling up climate innovation, which of course go across all industries, the supply chain, In that session, we will have both John Kerry and Bill Gates speaking. So I would definitely suggest you see it, listen to it. And then I want to thank you all. Thank you, Uday. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Josh. This is just the beginning of something really big. And I want to thank you for leading this. I want to thank you, Uday, for really pushing this mission. And it's going to be a great, great journey that we are getting on. So thank you so much. And thanks here from the Wood House. Today, the Big Energy Day, a lot of great conversations is happening around the world and online about what we can do to get to net zero. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you so much, Anne.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.